Section 4 of The Black Cat, Volume 2, Number 12, September 1897. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Dan Grzinski. The Black Cat, Volume 2, Number 12, September 1897, Section 4, Information Wanted, by PERCIE W. HART. As some people feel themselves imposed upon by a story that ends in an interrogation point, I wish to state at the outset that this narrative deals with an unsolved mystery. My only excuse for publishing the facts here given is my conviction that among 70 millions of Americans there must be one who can supply the missing links. I therefore take the public into my confidence, with the hope of securing the cooperation of thousands of active intellects, in aiding me to work out the complete solution of a surprising social anomaly. I reside at 527 Riverside Avenue in the busy manufacturing city of Newark, New Jersey. As I came out of my front door on the morning of the 16th day of November, 1895, some few minutes before the 7 o'clock factory whistles blew, my dog came bounding towards me, carrying the remains of a small paper kite in his mouth. As I bent over to pat him on the head, I noticed that the tail of the kite was constructed from pieces of paper that had been written upon. Carelessly detaching one of these pieces and glancing over it with a sort of mild curiosity, I became deeply interested and eagerly secured the remainder. These crumpled sheets were all of about the same size and appeared to have been torn from an ordinary pocket memorandum book. The handwriting was that of a thoroughly methodical man, and the pages being numbered at the corners, it was merely the work of a few moments to arrange them in their proper sequence. To my surprise and delight, not a single number was missing, and I give their contents herewith without change or comment. As the matter is continuous, I have dispensed with quotation marks, these being unnecessary to distinguish the diary from my own narrative. The first page, numbered 3, however, may be likened to a title page and bears the following descriptive wording in a small, neat script. This little book is hereby devoted to the subject of mysterious disappearances, January 1889. The matter then continues uninterruptedly in the form of a diary as follows. January 3rd, 1889. It seems almost absurd for me to enter into a full explanation of my purposes in beginning this little book, as it is scarcely probable that anyone but myself will ever read it. But parental example, as well as inherited traits of character, have conduced to make me systematic in all my undertakings, great or small. I have therefore set aside this small volume for the sole purpose of recording anything that would help to explain the unaccountable disappearances from time to time of men occupying good social position and possessed of liberal wealth. Some few short months ago, I should probably have laughed at anybody who would have ventured to suggest that there was any such mystery. But the fact of my becoming a directly interested party has caused me to realize the magnitude and possibilities of my subject. Nay, more. If anyone would but take occasion to note the number of such disappearances chronicled by his favorite newspaper in the course of a 12-month, one would be apt to realize the importance of the subject and wonder at the singular apathy of the general public in regard to it. The reason for my becoming a specially interested party may as well be stated at once. My own father has thus disappeared. As he was a man of ample fortune, free from any special business cares, and vigorous bodily health, without any taint of inherited insanity, and scarcely past 80 years, the theory of suicide, aside from the non-discovery of the body, is wholly irrational. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon of Friday, the 20th day of October, 1888, he left his house for the purpose of looking after the wants of a tenant. He never returned, never called upon the lessee, and his disappearance was as absolutely and mysteriously accomplished as if he had been instantly converted into nothingness. The fact of our being on a more or less secluded street may account for his passing down the block unnoticed, but it is truly remarkable that after he went out of the front gate, no one can be found who remembers seeing him anywhere. With his wide acquaintance, distinctive dress, and commanding appearance, he was not one likely to pass unnoticed. Yet, in spite of liberal rewards and the very best detective skill in the country, not the faintest sign of a clue can be discovered. My father had been especially hearty and cordial in his family relations during the few weeks preceding the catastrophe, and in spite of my better judgment, my mind is filled with inexpressible feats and vague forebodings. I have no close friend for a confidant, and even if I had, should be very much puzzled in regard to enlisting his aid or sympathy, for the reason that I have absolutely nothing material to confide. January 8. In looking over the documents and books pertaining to my father's estate, I find that everything is in perfect order, some future contingencies even being provided for. If it were not for my own knowledge of my father's extremely systematic ways, I should be forced to the conclusion that he had arranged his affairs in the expectation of just such an event as has occurred. January 17. The Boston Star contains an account of a disappearance case. It is really remarkable what a small item they have made of it, but I presume that the general public cares little to read about a mystery not yet unveiled. A well-known banker and gold broker, John C. Borum, senior partner of the firm of Borum and Updike, with offices in the Dorchester building on Tremont Street, leaves his place of business at 2:30 in the afternoon of the 10th, instant with the announced intention of proceeding to his home in Brookline. The elevator boy remembers that, as was his usual custom, he turned to the right on going out of the main door of the building, which was in the proper direction for his car at the corner of School Street. But in spite of this, an old acquaintance of Mr. Borum's is quite positive that he saw him walking hurriedly across the common within a few moments of the time at which he was known to have left the office. His continued absence from home and business created no special alarm until about noon of the following day. Mr. Borum is reported to have been in good health, with genial family relations, and his partner has stated that there could be no cause for business worry, as the firm had made more money in the past year than in any 2 previous ones in their history. February 16. I have just concluded an exhaustive investigation of my father's business affairs, and I am rather surprised to note that in the past 10 years he has lost considerable sums by stock speculation. But as these losses are much more than offset by his profits in other operations, I should have passed it over. But for this fact, which, after all, may be nothing more than a mere coincidence. These items, charged against stock speculation profit and loss account, though all consisting individually of uneven amounts in both dollars and cents, add up to exactly $100,000 even money. The checks for these items were all made payable to bearer, and are therefore without any endorsement. An inquiry at the bank elicits the fact that they were all cashed personally by my father. February 24. Am utterly unable to find a stockbroker who has ever handled an account for my father. March 4. After a careful personal cross-examination, I must confess that I seem heretofore to have been actuated by a spirit of morbid curiosity rather than by a hearty desire to unveil some hidden mystery. But while I am willing to acknowledge that this apparent loss by stock speculation of exactly $100,000 in 10 years is hardly likely to have any bearing upon my father's disappearance, the fact of the personally cashed checks and the absence of explanatory details seem to warrant me in seeking some further clue to the transactions. With this object in view, I am carefully going over every book, document, or memorandum of his in my possession. March 6th. In spite of all my close research, the only suspicious item that I have found is a name written in an address book of my father's, which comprised both business and social connections. upon one page. Sandwiched in between a number of other names were the two words, Valjean Narpoli. Contrary to my father's usual custom, no address was given and no indication as to the business attributes of the individual, if such a cognomen really belongs to an individual. There were 2 points noticeable about this strange name. The first is the manner in which it is written. Instead of the usual carefully rounded and shaded letters of my father's familiar chirography, these, while retaining his individuality, are shaky and somewhat indistinct. They look as if the writer had been laboring under some strong nervous excitement. Moreover, it is the only item so written in all the mass of matter at my disposal. The second point is an important one, as I believe. Before setting it down here, I shall take pains to verify it more thoroughly. March 8. Owing to the nature of the other names upon the same page, I'm absolutely certain that the words Valjean Narpoli were written between 10 and 11 years ago. The relation between this name, the apparent loss by stock speculation of exactly $100,000 in 10 years, and my father's mysterious disappearance, this is the question to be solved. I shall follow up these few clues tenaciously. January 3rd, 1890. It is now a full year since I began this record. That I have not been able to add a word to it for over 9 months is not from any lack of effort on my part. I have subscribed for the leading newspapers of the world, and I scan their columns closely for any details of my hobby, and of course have noted several additional cases since that of Mr. Borum. But as they contain no distinctive features, I have not thought them of sufficient import to be entered. I have inserted advertisements in many newspapers asking for information in regard to Valjean Narpoli. The wording was carefully guarded and framed as if by one who had valuable information to impart, and they were signed, of course, with a disguised name and address. Up to date, however, I have received no replies. February 3rd. In very desperation at my ill success, I am going to note a French disappearance, which has been printed in this morning's papers. Monsieur Henri Defleur, member of the Chamber of Deputies for the Department of the Loire, well known on the Bourse as a successful speculator in South American mining stocks, who has resided at 142 Rue Saint-Denis, Paris, for the last 30 years, has unaccountably disappeared. He leaves his residence for a short walk in the Bois and fails to return. No one remembers seeing him after he left the house, and the police are absolutely without any plausible clue. Health, finances, social relations, and future prospects are entirely unquestionable. There are no special features to distinguish his case from any other, but the remarkable sameness of details in all these disappearances is so peculiar as to be positively suspicious. February 19. Have received a copy of the current issue of the Review, containing a special article called forth by the recent disappearance of Monsieur Defleur. If I had needed anything to corroborate my incipient suspicions, I have it here at last, in the person of one who is following out a similar theory. The writer claims an intimate personal friendship with the missing man and shows a keen insight into the workings of social economics. After a minute account of Defleur's temperament, attainments, and ambitions, he proceeds to argue against the possibility of his having committed suicide. He then branches off upon the general subject of mysterious disappearances, and I here write down a condensation of some of his most pertinent thoughts. In a journalistic experience of close upon a quarter of a century, the writer remarks, it has been fallen to my lot to chronicle the mysterious disappearance of many members of the upper class of society. Whether such a condition of affairs obtains among the lower classes, it is extremely difficult to determine, owing to the less important position they occupy in the public estimation. But from my own experience, I am inclined to the belief that it is comparatively rare. In regard to the former, I am able to state that in 1882, the first year of which I have memoranda, There were 5 such disappearances in Paris alone. While the number has varied from year to year, the tendency has been towards steady increase, and in the past year, 1889, it reached a surprising total of 14. It would be interesting if the statistics on this subject, for France as well as for the rest of the civilized world, were obtainable. Leaving statistics and crude theories behind and dismissing the idea of suicide, let us return to the original causes and seek for some plausible motive for voluntary absence. Taking the special class of victims concerned for 7 years back, I find that the average age is 62. They are, without exception, men of means as well as of social or political importance, with good vitality, and in nearly every case their harmonious family affairs were beyond the shadow of suspicion. With the 3 things that are possible of human attainment, health, wealth, in money as well as in fame, happiness, they were abundantly provided. My theory of a motive, therefore, would be something as follows. From the cradle to the grave, man expends his daily energy in seeking out new work for his muscles, new fields for his eyes, or new sounds for his ears. The individual methods may be far removed from one another, but the motive is the same. It can be unequivocally stated that the average man is never contained in the full meaning of the word. Even unlimited success will pall, and the multimillionaire, the victorious general, and the world-renowned scientist become victims of ennui at the very height of success. There are times in every man's life when he asks himself the use of it all. Why strive for apples that are found to be sour and worm-eaten? Why toil and labor when graves and even good deeds are so soon forgotten? Oh, to escape this incessant expenditure of time and thought upon problems connected merely with the animal wants of our human existence. Imagine the strength of such feelings in the class of which we are treating. Everything has been attained, and for them, unlike the humble artisan or prospering trader, there is absolutely no future to look forward to. Philanthropy, patronage, the spreading of favorite doctrines or theories only put off the inevitable time when, unless death comes quickly, such a man will surely relapse into a driveling dotard. The biographies, diaries, personal memoirs, and public actions of the world's great men are the best proofs of this sad truth. Granted, therefore, that we have a possible cause or motive for disappearance, what is the nature of the novelty in living so to be attained? That is the knotted skein, the unknown quantity that we cannot even conjecture. By the careful reasoner, however, it will be at once admitted that no return to a lower condition of life would content a man who had once mounted the ladder. On the other hand, the view from its topmost rung, even if again attainable, would be no novelty. The new existence must be on an entirely different plane and entirely different circumstances. We must, however, instinctively acknowledge the presence of confederates in such a well-executed plan of disappearance, whatever the result of such plans. This would mean to our human minds a lavish expenditure of money. What is obtained by the disappearance in return for this outlay is something that only time and thorough investigation can reveal. February 19th, 1893. 3 years have gone by since I last wrote in this book. 3 years that seem like 3 months, and then again like 3 centuries. In this time I have gained, enjoyed, and lost a wife and child. It seems incredible that such unselfish love and devotion can be without fruit in a hereafter. During these years I have forgotten my hobby. Today, however, hardly knowing what I did, I picked up a newspaper, and almost the first paragraph that met my eyes was the following. 10 days have now elapsed since John C. Graham, banker of Exchange Place Building, New York City, left his office, and so far not the slightest clue as to his fate has been obtained. He started from his place of business at 3:30 in the afternoon with the announced intention of dropping into the Union League Club before going to his home. The cabman who drove him uptown avers that when he reached the club and opened the door of his vehicle, he found the man had vanished. Mr. Graham has been a member of the stock exchange for over 25 years and has been a power in the world of finance during the best part of that time. The last person who is known to have talked with Mr. Graham is a foreign-looking individual whose whereabouts at the present time are unknown. He was closeted with the banker just before the latter left his office. The attendant is positive that this reception by Mr. Graham was extremely cordial, and that the latter addressed him as Mr. Narpoli. As I write, my hand trembles like the hunter's when he spies his long-sought quarry. At last, thank God, I have found something confirmatory of my suspicions. No power on earth can convince me that this Narpoli is not the Valjean Narpoli whose name I found in such suspicious connection with my revered father's transactions. March 28th. The skilled detective who wishes to secure a criminal often finds it expedient to disguise his identity for a time and associate with that section of society most likely to have furnished the lawbreaker. The reason of this lies in the tendency of mankind towards herding in classes whose interests are more or less in common. From titled aristocrats down to sneak thieves and second-story men, they all tend to form coteries or friendly circles in keeping with their various grades. In the present case, the suspected class consists of men of wealth and high social standing. They are the class whence the mysterious disappearances are drawn. Why should the methods of the detective not succeed if applied in this direction? If I should disguise myself as a man of, say, 60 years of age, replete with honors, satiated with wealth, and openly complaining of life's unsatisfactoriness, if I should seek the society of other men, so constituted and so thinking, is it not reasonable to suppose that an opportunity for disappearance may be held out to me also? May 4th. Have been to Europe and back again since the last entry. I left as a youngish-looking, blonde-complexioned American. I have returned a mature, gray-haired, dark-skinned foreigner, presumably French. The art of disguise has never been lost in Paris. May 12th. Have located in this city, where my personality is utterly unknown, have rented an elegantly furnished mansion, and have already received some considerable attentions. May 13. A morning newspaper contains the following item. We hear on very good authority that the latest distinguished addition to society is a member of one of the leading families of Europe, and that he has become nauseated with the subtleties and petty intrigues of court life. Have been elected a member of an extremely conservative club that numbers among its members a large proportion of those whom I now denominate suspicious characters. May 20. It is now generally understood that I belong to some aristocratic French family, and that for various political reasons I have been educated and brought up in England. I am spreading my small fortune with a lavish hand. June 16th. Have carefully canvassed the whole list of my acquaintances, and in confidential conversations have taken pains to express my utter disgust with the world and its vagaries. I may be mistaken, but a certain railroad president appears to take special interest in me. June 29. At last I have met the man I seek. He came to the club with the railroad president and was introduced to me as Monsieur Valjean Narpoli. Though consumed by an inward fever, I managed to appear listless and uninterested, and was but scantily cordial in my greetings. June 30. In spite of my theory, I could not help being agitated when Narpoli made evident efforts to ingratiate himself with me this evening. Without attracting his attention, I have made careful note of his personality. He is an undersized, sallow-complexioned, foreign-looking individual, dresses well, but with an air of haste, linen spotless, but tie not properly adjusted, hands and feet small and well-shaped, and the former especially almost feminine. His forehead is high, nose and ears unobtrusive, and chin and back of head well balanced. His hair and mustache are scanty and almost white, and his eyes are indescribable for the reason that their aspect is ever changing. In our few hours' conversation, I have in turn set him down as a lunatic, a philanthropist, a criminal, a man of peaceful instincts, a human bloodhound, a lover of humanity, and various other antagonistic mentalities, simply and solely from the change in the expression of his eyes. The man is a perfect prodigy. I have tried him in every conceivable direction, and can find no limits to his attainments. Languages, archaeology, philosophy, astronomy, and all the rest of the learned sciences seem like a well-read book to him, and I find him expressing his ideas with the air of one who knows much more than he says, but conceives you hardly capable of understanding it. Sometimes he seems almost Mephistophelian, and I grow cold at heart when I think of my father. Again, I feel as if I should be perfectly willing to trust my own life in his hands. July 2nd. Valjean Narpoli is now under my own roof, as an invited guest. It would be possible for me to enter his chamber and force a confession at the pistol's mouth. But has he something to confess, or are my suspicions but the offspring of an unduly excited brain? And again, is such a one as I conceive him to be likely to confess, even at death's door? My only chance is to wait. July 3rd. After a late dinner, we passed many hours in delightful conversation. Our talk drifted through all the mazes of dogmatism, theosophy, and evolution. Several times he seemed to regard me with a peculiar questioning look, and I shall be extremely surprised if he does not make some disclosures tomorrow, or rather, as the sun is already showing, tonight. What the outcome will be I know not. From a vindictive suspicion of a possible conspiracy, my ideas and feelings have become so mixed and chaotic as to be impossible of logical expression. July 4. This evening, as we sat at ease in my library, Narpoli suddenly drew himself up in his chair, and waving his hands excitedly, spoke as follows. You doubtless consider yourself conversant with the principal inventions and discoveries that have marked the advance of civilization in this 19th century? The subtle force called electricity, that is captured, controlled, and utilized, and yet whose component parts and extreme powers are utterly unknown. The effect of sound waves, as recorded upon a revolving waxen cylinder, which perpetuates our songs and voices, while the primal cause of such sounds remains undiscoverable. The steam locomotive but there is no need to go down the whole line. A single illustration would serve to show the puny nature of our knowledge of all. A man of your age and experience knows how utterly unsatisfactory are the so-called exact sciences to an intelligent mind. But disappointing as they are, they seem to be all we can get, and the few short years that remain to you and me will doubtless see but a scant advance beyond the present knowledge line. It is sad to think of dying without even a dim perception of the many truths around us. But enough of science. I'm going to tell you a fairy tale. Once on a time, before the wolf nursed Romulus, before the writing appeared on the wall of the king's palace at Babylon, and even before the chisel's edge had shaped the Sphinx stone, there lived certain men who devoted their lives to the attainment of knowledge. It may astonish you to hear that, even in that distant day, these wise men knew considerably more than the average savant of the present century. One reason for this lay in the comparative newness of the world and the lack of countless antagonistic theories. These wise men were only human, however, and although they lived longer than the average of mankind, by reason of their peaceful, studious habits, still their day of reckoning came at last, as it must come to each one of us. But they had thought of and prepared for this contingency beforehand, and their stores of learning were passed on to favored disciples. This is certainly a pretty idea, is it not? If it were only true. Imagine the possibilities of such long-continued investigations, supposing that this study had been kept up continuously even to the present day. With your keen perception, you can readily see that such a class of men must be thousands of years in advance of our own time in their knowledge of all things. Would it not be a priceless boon, after one has exhausted the possibilities of ordinary civilization, to pass the few remaining years of life amidst such knowledge? To have the common mysteries of life swept aside like spray from one's forehead, and to be able to tread close upon even eternity itself? No, not a word more now. Is it really a fable? You shall know everything tomorrow. Good night. The whole mystery of the disappearance of such men as my father lies perfectly plain before me. The French journalist's unknown quantity is known. Valjean Narpoli has promised, and tomorrow I shall record herein the final. Here the paper was torn off in a jagged, uneven line, leaving the sentence incomplete. Such is the exact wording of the writing upon the pieces of paper that formed the tale of the curious kite that my black retriever dog brought to my feet on the morning of the 16th day of November, 1895, as was related in full in the preface to this narrative. While the story is extremely coherent, it will be noted that there is a marked absence of any names and places that could be used in identifying the writer. He is an American, however, and the principal action evidently takes place in some important city of our land. The references to one named Valjean Narpoli seem to be the only tangible clue, and his personal appearance is minutely described. Where the kite came from, and why such a book was mutilated for the purpose of completing it, is immaterial until this promoter of disappearances among the wearied rich is discovered. My motive in making the facts public is to ascertain whether the stupendous conclusion to be drawn from them is entitled to credence, or if it is merely the offspring of some deluded brain. Can anyone answer the question? End of Section 4.